In this video, we'll be making two very simple, easy to make stuff sacks, but then we'll modify them to better fit their contents. If you're interested in seeing how I do it, stay tuned. So before we begin, why am I making a different video on stuff sacks? Because I have made one just recently. Well, the last video that I made was how to make a tubular or cylindrical stuff sack. And I ended up designing and building one for my 16 centimeter zipper billy pot and all of its contents. And it has that round bottom on it. And that took quite a bit of work, both measuring and designing and making sure that everything fit together right. Well, I realized that this is a fairly complicated project for someone who's just starting out. And maybe it's just more of a stuff sack than anybody really wants for the type of pot or whatever it is that they're going to be putting in that. So there are simpler designs that go together quite easily, and I thought I'd make two different ones that are very simple but very easy to make, and then we'll modify them so that they better fit their contents. Hopefully this is something you find interesting. Let's have a look. Okay, for this first stuff sack design, you'll need a few things. So let's go through what we need. First off, you need whatever it is you're going to be making the stuff sack for. So what I have is a vegetable steamer that I picked up at Value Village. And I'm going to be turning this into a wood stove, but that's the topic for another video. So that's what I'm going to be using for the first project. Then, of course, you're going to need some material. So again, from Value Village, I picked up a remnant from their material section. And this is a kind of a nice material. I was quite lucky to find this. It's a polycotton ripstop, almost like uniform material, but it's a dark gray material, very tough. And it's not something that's going to unravel easily. It's just perfect for making stuff sacks as well. So I'm going to put that aside because I have already cut out the piece I'll need, but I'll explain how I arrived at this size and this shape in a moment. You're also going to need some pins for pinning this together before you sew it. Scissors, good pair of scissors is recommended to make your life a lot easier for cutting the material. You don't need, but you might find handy, is a straight edge for marking on the material. And I also have one of my Sharpies here. Now, ideally, you would use something that will wash out of the material, especially if you're using a light colored material. So there is a tailor's chalk that you can use for marking on this. And you'll be able to see the lines where it is you want to sew or pin or whatever else you want to do. For me, I don't think that's going to be an issue for a couple of reasons. One, it's dark material, and this dark marker is not going to show up very darkly on it, or not a lot of contrast. The other reason is all the marks that I'm going to make on the material will end up being on the inside of the bag when I'm finished with it, because of course we work primarily with everything inside out while we're sewing or getting ready to sew it, and then it will disappear inside. And it's a stuff sack for something that's going to get dirty. I don't look at this as something that needs to be all that pretty, if you will. Okay, now the one other thing you need is some way of sewing. I will be using a sewing machine, my wife's older sewing machine. I think I've mentioned this in previous videos. I won't be showing myself actually sewing the stuff sack, because that is a skill and a technique specific to the machine. Now, yes, there is some basic skills involved in using a machine that transfer to all machines, but how you set it up and how you start it, it is really dependent on the machine itself. So I'm going to be leaving that part out. You don't need a sewing machine. It will make life a lot easier, but you don't have to have a sewing machine for this project. You can do this by hand. This is not a huge project, and straight lines are not essential for this. They're helpful, but not essential. So a sewing machine is not essential, but it does make it go a lot faster. The other thing I don't have here, and again is not necessary, in fact I'm not going to use it on this project I don't think, and that is an iron. And the reason I would use an iron is to make a fold in the material that I intend on sewing down and then iron it, just to make it stay in place while I pin it. But you don't need that. Okay, let me take a few of these tools and set them aside. Let's talk about how I arrived at this size and piece of material. So this first stuff sack is going to be what's known as a fold-over style. So what I did basically is took my remnant of material and I looked to see if it had any odd angles that I could make use of. In this case, it was pretty much an even-sided rectangle. And I took my piece of, or what it is I'm trying to make a stuff sack for, and it's as simple as this. I laid it down and I folded the material over. And I made sure that I had enough room all the way around for seam allowances and the bulk of the item taking up some space inside. And then I marked it and cut it. And that's why it's this side. No special logic involved, no special measurements. And that's one of the things that differentiates this project from the one we did, the cylindrical stuff sack from my Zebra 16 centimeter pie, was that you don't have to make a lot of measurements. It's as simple as fitting the material to the piece of or what it is that you're trying to make the stuff sack for. All right, so for the time being, we can put the item aside. Now, first thing is decide which is going to be the inside and outside. Most pieces of material are self-evident. Now this just happens to be identical inside and out, so it really doesn't make any difference. So from there, I have to decide which side is going to be the one that I want my drawstring to go through, because that's the first thing we're going to do, is create the channel for the drawstring. So the way to do that is as simple as this. Take one straight side and fold the material over. How big do you want your channel to be? 3/4 of an inch is plenty. Now you can see I'm just folding the material over. And I'm kind of pressing it down with my thumb. This is where a steam iron would come in handy. I'm noticing that the material is not even all the way across, and that's probably due to that it wasn't a perfect straight edge. It helps if you start with a nice straight edge, and if you're very particular about how this looks at the end, that's important. If you're not too particular, it's not that important. All right, so I have my piece of material folded over, and I'm going to show you this up close in a second. Now, if you have material that tends to fray easily, a little bit of a pull, and you start getting fraying, then the way to avoid having that happen is to fold it a second time, so that you have that raw edge turned in on the channel. Now, you'll have to allow for that because that uses up twice as much, or a little bit more at least, of material, so you'll have to allow for that when you size the piece out. For this material, because it's a ripstop polycotton, it's not the type of material that frays at the edges very easily, so I'm not too concerned about that happening. And again, if it's a tiny bit of fraying, or you can see a bit of a raw edge, first off, it's on the inside of the stuff sack. Second off, I'm not really that concerned about it. I'm not creating something for its looks. So you can see I have the material folded down. Now the next thing to do is to pin it. This is, I think I've mentioned this before, the part of the project that takes the most time, and I certainly won't make you watch me do the whole thing, but ideally, better the other way, at least for me. I like to place pins starting as close to the top edge as possible. I'll give you a look at what I'm doing in a second. I think I can just put 2 in, and then I'll give you an idea what I'm doing. Okay. So first off, you can see where I have folded the channel down the length of material, and it looks like it turned out closer to 1 inch in general all the way down. And now I've put the first 2 pins in as well, and I have one as close to the edge as I could reasonably get it, and the second one is spaced about 1 inch apart. And so it's pinning both pieces of material together, and I'll be running the sewing machine down the length of this, of course. How many pins do you want to use? How close should they be? Well, let's put it this way. The more you use, the straighter the piece of material will be at the end, or the better the sewing will be. However, it does take more time. I like to put them 1 inch to 1.5 inches, depending on the material. Some material requires a lot of pinning, some material, not so much. This I could probably get away with spacing the pins out a little bit more, but I'm going to be placing mine 1 inch and 1.5 inches, and I'll put it all the way down. So what I'll do is I'll do that off camera, and I'll bring it back and show you what it looks like when it's fully pinned. Okay, so I've got the pinning done for the side fold stuff sack, and you can see I just have a length of pins running perpendicular to the fold lines. That's going to be the channel for our draw cord. So I'll take this to the sewing machine and sew it down, and then I'll come back. Okay, so I've finished sewing the channel, removed the pins, and I chose to use a light gray thread in this case, although I'm a little embarrassed by it now looking at it. And the reason I chose to use the light gray is just to show you the stitch line, but I obviously wasn't paying as close attention as I could have, and I'm a little wonky in terms of the straight line that I wanted to create. That again is one of the advantages of actually drawing right onto your material with a tailor's chalk, is so that you can follow that line on the sewing machine. If you're using a black or a matching thread, you're not going to see that, but I wanted you to be able to see the sew lines that I've gotten here. So I've done, and again for this project, this is not a showpiece of something that I'm going to show as something I'm proud of. It's just something that it's a functional piece to keep a dirty stove from messing up my backpack. All right. Now, as I mentioned, everything is going to be done inside out. So I'm turning the raw edge of the seam down onto the table for the next step. And the next step is to take my item that it is that I'm using in this case. And by the way, I don't know if I mentioned, I chose to use a flatter, rounder item for this. It could have, I mean, it really doesn't matter what shape of the item it is you're going to be making. I mean, you might be making a stuff sack just for a general collection of a lot of small things. But for the project and the way we're going to modify this after the basic stuff sack is made, I wanted to use something with a round edge, and I'll show you that when I get to that point. But you could use anything to match either of these. I sometimes choose to use the fold over ones when I'm using a round, flat, or shallow, if you will, item, because it just seems to fit the item better. Okay, so that said, so now what I'm going to do is fold that over, make sure that everything still lines up, and I've still got plenty of room, and I have more than enough room here. So what I'll be doing is pinning all the way around the outside and sewing that down. And again, make sure you do everything inside out at this point so that it hides the seams, because we'll be turning it right side out at the end of the project. So rather than make you watch me pin and sew that, I'll do that and bring you back. Okay, we have the side fold stuff sack sewn. So we have the channel created across the top, and then I sewed down one side, across the other, and of course that's the folded side. So essentially we're most of the way completed with this stuff sack. Very simple, square design, just a fold over piece of material with a channel and then sewn down two sides. What we want to do now is take the item that we're going to be putting in the stuff sack and just make sure that it fits in before we go to the next step. And this one fits in with room to spare, and that's great. So we have lots of room in here, not so much that it's a waste of material, but lots of room in here so I can get a few other things inside of it if I want to at the same time. So that's great. We know that that's going to fit. Now we're going to put the cord, the draw cord, through the channel. But before we do, just a quick little tip that I've learned over time, and that is to cut a small notch. And I'm going to show you. I better do that before I even cut it. Right here, right at the top, that's where the two open ends of the channel are. You can see that's where the cord will be going through, those two open ends. What I find, once it's turned right side out again, they will actually kind of interfere with each other for the cord going through. So I like just to take a tiny notch out of there, and I'll show you that. Just a tiny notch. Probably 1/4 inch in both directions. You know, I'm working with this material, and it is tough material. This is not going to rip, and that's probably why they call it ripstop. But it's a little bit more a challenge to work with than some materials, but it gives you a nice sense of confidence that it's going to work out. So there's that tiny notch that I created right there, and you'll see why in a second. Now let's turn the bag inside out. The corners out a little bit. So there's the stuff sack. Now you can see where that notch was created. When I put the drawstring through, it doesn't interfere. So let me put the drawstring through. So the way to do a drawstring, and I think I've shown this in other videos, but I think it's worth showing again, is I have a piece of very flexible, this is that 20 gauge galvanized wire that I use from the dollar store. This is another one of those used for it. Some people call this a fish, some people just call it a guide. So it's just folded over in the middle, and it's longer than the stack is. And what I'm going to do is go in through one end of, I guess I should show you the paracord through. first. So I'm going to be using a piece of paracord for the drawstring, and the paracord is also a lighter gray, just a little lighter than the bag itself is. And to decide how long you want it to be, lay the thing down, and it's going to be doubled. So you can see I've got a doubled over piece of paracord going from one side out through where the holes for the channel are, and I've got about 3.5 to 4 inches left over, and that's just enough for me to put an overhand knot in, as you'll see. All right, now let's put it through. So I start by taking my fish, working that all the way around the material till it protrudes out the other end. Like that. So you can see the fish is coming out the far end of the material. A little loop on the end of the fish or the wire. Spread it apart so I can get my paracord in there, put 1.5 inches or so in, and work it back into the channel. And once you get inside the channel, you can, not quite inside yet. There we go. Just literally pull on the wire, and it will pop out the other end. There. So now we have the paracord coming out the far end of it. We have to have some means of securing or snugging up the cord. You can use a cord lock, plastic spring-loaded cord lock if you have it. I just use beads, little wooden beads. Any bead will do. The hole just has to be big enough to get both pieces of paracord through. Now I've melted the ends of both pieces of this paracord, and sometimes that can be a bit of a nuisance trying to get it through. Let's just see if I can get this through. If not, I can remelt it and make it a little smaller. Yeah, I think it's going to go through. That's a little tight. I'm just about through. There we go. Okay, so you can see that I've got the cord lock through. I'll take the cord right up to the edge of the material, tie a simple overhand knot, and that is a finished stuff sack. It doesn't have to be anything else done to it. The thing that I made it for goes inside, and I'm done. However, that's only half the project we're going to do today. Now we're going to make this fit a little bit better. What do I mean by fit better? Well, you can see that I've got wasted material on either side. Wouldn't it be nice if I could round off that back end so that there wasn't any wasted material flapping around and I could just make it a little bit more form-fitting? Well, let's do that. All right. Take the item out. Turn the bag back inside out. Lay it flat. Now we're going to draw a half circle right around the base of the bag here. The best way to do that is to find something like a dinner plate or a pot lid or something that covers up pretty much all the bag. It doesn't have to be a real tight circle. You want it to go maybe from the center point, just an arc. You could freehand this quite readily with your marking pen. I like to use a lid off of something, so I'm going to take a second, find a lid, we'll lay it down, and then we'll show you where it goes from there. All right, I had a look around my workshop here, and what did I find? A pie crust shield. And I picked this up at Value Village, and I'll show you in another video what I bought this for, but basically I'm going to be using it upside down on a Dutch oven, a cast iron Dutch oven I have that doesn't have the built-in rim. I'm going to be using this as a makeshift rim so that I can hold hot coals on top of that round-topped Dutch oven. But for the purpose of this, it's going to be our guide for drawing the circle. And I chose this because it extends over both sides, because I want to be able to draw from edge to edge. So find my center point somewhere where I'm going to line this up. Lay it down. I want to see where it crosses the outside edge here and here to be at the same height up both sides. I'm going to use my my Sharpie marker and just go around. Okay, so I have my line drawn on here. Next step is just that simple. Pin this just like I did the sides with the straight pins all the way around and sew it. So I'll do that and I'll bring it back. Okay, just quickly before I go to the sewing machine, I thought I'd better show you this just in case you weren't aware of it. So I have that half circle or that arc drawn on. I have it pinned, and just it's kind of important to be able to pin at 90 degrees to the arc, so you can see how the pins follow the arc all the way around, and they're pinning across the line that I drew at 90 degrees. And the reason you do that is for the safety of the sewing machine. At the angle, if you were to have the angle more in line with the angle of the pin, more in line with the line there, you're more likely to hit it with the sewing machine needle and break the needle, and then you'll be in a position where you have to either buy or find needles and replace those. So you're less likely to hit the pin with the sewing machine needle if you go at a straight 90 degrees to the line you've drawn. Okay, now let me go sew this and bring it back. All right, completed. So you can see the stitch line, where the stitch line went right around the bottom. Now we've got a curve going around the base of the stuff sack. Let's turn the stuff sack back right side out again. See what it looks like completed. Let's see what it looks like with the vegetable steamer / wood stove inside. Now, catching on the legs. All right. And you can see how the curved bottom forms itself better to the round item inside, or the rounded item inside. And that's true if it's a rounded pot that's wider than it is tall, or anything else. A fry pan you can make these for, just about anything. If you want to just have it a little bit more trim and a little bit more fit to the item, then yeah, put that curve on the bottom. All right, that's one stuff sack finished. This very simple design. Then we just modified it to make it a little bit more fitting to the item that we're putting inside of it. Now let's go on to the other stuff sack design.